I regularly get told that the grid won't be able to cope with a large-scale transition of transport to EVs. That's a bit of a worry, because if that's true, how am I going to charge my Renault Zoe? Perhaps in this video I better investigate. So you join me here at the Leighton Buzzard Battery Energy Storage Park in Bedfordshire, UK. This is a big grid-connected lithium-ion battery energy storage system. We're going to watch it turned on for the first time, and because we know that lithium-ion batteries are at risk of bursting into flames at any moment, we're going to watch that happen right as they turn it on. It's going to be a great show. Stick with me, we're going to enjoy it. Any second now. Any minute. What time did you say it was turning on? 2014. That's hours away. 8:15. Oh, what? The year 2014? Well, so it's been operational 9 years. But I can't see any smoke damage or fire damage or... What? Oh, it's not caught fire in all that time. Oh, right, okay. Oh, sorry folks, no news here. Let's maybe start this discussion with some facts, some cold hard facts, some statistics. In the UK, electricity usage has fallen 16% since 2002. This is driven largely by an increase in energy efficiency of the devices that we use, particularly the switch to LED lighting that's taken place in that time, but helped by various EU mandates which have sought to reduce the energy used by home appliances. You may remember the one that took place about vacuum cleaners. It became quite famous. People were very worried about the power of the vacuum cleaners being reduced in order to meet the necessary mandate laws. It's thought that EV charging will cause about a 10% increase in the overall energy usage. Therefore, we will still be less than we used in 2002, even with all EVs being charged off the grid. Now, the source of that information is not a willy-nilly one. It is the national grid in the UK. I'm going to put in the description and also on the end screen of this video a link to a fully charged podcast with a guy called Graeme who is the project director for electric vehicles for the national grid. You might want to watch that after you've watched this one. The energy usage in the UK and in most countries follows a thing called a duck curve. As we can see in this graphic, this duck curve is a daily thing which results in a peak period, and in the UK that's from about 3 until 8 p.m. This is the point at which the energy on the grid is the dirtiest and also the most expensive. The energy market uses half-hourly bidding, and therefore if energy demand goes up, then the price of electricity goes up as people increase their bids to cover that particular cost. Now, EV charging patterns can actually help flatten the curve rather than make it worse. You see, EVs can be charged when they're not in use, and that is particularly true overnight for anyone that can do so. Cost can be used as a carrot to encourage overnight charging because the energy demand is at its lowest at that point, and therefore the cost of that energy is at its lowest as well. And as it happens, it's also at its cleanest. In other words, it's producing the least amount of CO2. Legislation will help as well. In the UK, the government introduced a thing called the Electric Vehicles Smart Charge Points Regulations 2021. Which came into effect on the 30th of June 2022. That requires that all newly installed home chargers after that point have to be smart aware. So what's smart aware? What's that about? Well, that's simply that the charger needs to understand the concept of electricity usage patterns. And then the charger will encourage the user to delay charging until energy usage is past its evening peak. Now don't worry, you can override this if you want to, but it's just the default behaviour to try to nudge you in the right direction of doing charging when energy cost and when the cleanliness of energy and the supply of it is plentiful. So, to my experience, well, I've recently moved to Octopus Intelligent, relatively new tariff with a fairly new company called Octopus Energy. That tariff charges me 7.5 pence per kilowatt hour for 6 hours of overnight period. My Ohmie Home Pro charger is internet connected, and what that means is that the charger can work out the cheapest and greenest charging possible based upon those half-hourly slots that are pre-forecast a day ahead. And then that charger can switch my car on and off to fit the schedule. That means that the charging is the cheapest and the greenest. So this reduces the CO2 emissions associated with charging my car. But I'm also encouraged to do so by the very low price of overnight electricity, which is passed on to me by Octopus Energy. What about public charging? Well, Tesla also does variable pricing based upon time, with a peak period in the middle of the day being the most expensive and overnight charging usually being the cheapest. There are a couple of other charge point operators who I've seen do this a little bit, but not very many yet. This seems likely to come, however. I wonder whether there will be some legislation coming in the future in order to achieve fairness for the people who can't charge at home and are forced to charge on the public network. They should be able to benefit from this variability in energy cost and charge when it's cheaper for them. At the moment, that is possible in some places, but not very many. Now, when we think of energy usage, what is actually going to be a bigger problem is the switch to clean heating systems, because that's going to drive demand way more than EVs. It's going to significantly increase the energy usage when we have to switch off gas and oil heating that we use in the UK to electric heating systems, particularly heat pumps. However, the national grid are preparing for this, and it will be the same in other countries as well. This is a predictable demand increase that they can see coming, and they are well aware of it and preparing for it. We should remember too that increases in energy usage, electricity usage, are not an unprecedented change. From 1950 to 1973, the US more than doubled its energy usage in the country. This was partially, although not completely, driven by mass adoption of air conditioning, which, as you can imagine, put quite a strain on the national grid. However, the word strain is not really appropriate. It happened over 23 years, and they kept the lights on and didn't really have much of a problem. Their grid coped absolutely fine with that increase over that period. You see, we can achieve huge projects when we want to. We should not underestimate what we can achieve when we need to or want to. Look at all of the fossil fuel infrastructure that we have built as an example of this. Think of all the oil rigs, refineries and pipelines across the globe. As of 2022, there were 1,732 active oil rigs in the world. That's actually significantly down from 3,409 active in 2014. Each one of those is an enormous project, particularly offshore oil rigs, although a significant number of these are actually onshore, which might make them smaller and simpler. In 2023, there are 825 active oil refineries. If you've seen an oil refinery, then you know that that is a pretty massive piece of infrastructure as well that needs to be invested in and built. As of December 2020, there are 2,381 operational oil and gas pipelines in the world. Those have a combined length of more than 1.18 million kilometres. That's 730,000 miles. That's enough to circle the globe 30 times. That's a lot of pipelines that we've built. On top of all of that infrastructure, 40% of global shipping is used for moving fossil fuels around the world. That's also a huge number of ships that needed to be built, maintained and run, and yet we do that fine. You see, we can build anything when we want to. And indeed, compared to the global nature of the fossil fuel infrastructure, a bit more electricity infrastructure in each country is actually pretty easy. Now, that's not to say there haven't been some problems. There have been some local interconnect issues. There are some areas, particularly rural areas, where providing large new interconnects has actually been a bit of a problem. That has slowed down some installations. It hasn't stopped them completely, but it has slowed them, perhaps by a couple of years, which of course is a bit of a problem. So some upgrades will of course be needed in order to bring local infrastructure up to the point where we can overcome this problem over time. However, there are some interesting options, and that includes local energy storage buffers. So this, the Leighton Buzzard Energy Storage Park. This is a 6 megawatt, 10 megawatt hour lithium-ion energy storage project commissioned in 2014. This does small time shift, frequency regulation and energy reserve jobs for the national grid in order to support the local infrastructure here in Leighton Buzzard. From what I can tell, this seems to have been working extremely well for the 9 years since it was commissioned. Now, this was considered a groundbreaking and large project in its heyday, but it has since been absolutely dwarfed by newer projects. Take, for example, the Buzzard project in Kingston upon Hull, East Yorkshire. That is a 98 megawatt, 196 megawatt hour Tesla energy storage system. At the time of its commissioning, that was dubbed the largest storage project in Europe. But it has probably been superseded by now, and even if it hasn't yet, it probably will be soon as these projects get larger and larger. Now, that energy storage project was brought online ahead of schedule in November 2022. At that point in time, we were in the midst of the energy crisis, which was brought about by a huge hike in the price of natural gas. That was caused by the war on Ukraine and the fact that we didn't want to use Russian gas anymore in Europe. So there was a concern at that time about energy reserves because of the sheer cost of replenishing any gas that was used, either for heating or for generating electricity, both of which we do a lot here in the UK. Now, that energy storage project, the Buzzard project there, is part of actually a much bigger development. It's part of the Dogger Bank wind farm development, which is an absolutely enormous offshore wind development that is taking place off the coast there in the North Sea. Now, that energy storage project actually only cost £75 million to install. And okay, that sounds like a big number, I know. But in comparison, in 2023, the global investment in fossil fuel infrastructure is expected to be $950 billion US dollars. That is 760 billion pounds. So that energy storage project actually only cost 1/10,000th of the annual fossil fuel infrastructure investment that takes place at the moment. In its first 6 months of operation, the Buzzard project generated £2.3 million in revenue. So, do we consider that project a success? Well, the company that owns it is building another 6, more or less as fast as it possibly can. So, yeah, I would say that's probably considered quite a success. Now, although those energy numbers probably sounded big, in the grand scheme of what we use in the UK, that is fairly small beer. So each of these energy storage projects helps, but we will of course need much more. That will probably consist not only of lithium ion, which is good for short-term energy storage and frequency regulation, but probably something to do longer-term energy storage as well, to cope with the difference between summer and winter demand. Now, the actual technology for doing that is the one bit of technology which hasn't been nailed down. There's a couple of strong contenders, and probably flow batteries is one of those. But we are going to need something probably in order to help with that winter to summer difference. However, we are blessed in the UK. We have very shallow seas off our coasts, and that means there is plenty of wind resources and windy conditions, which we can use in order to build a lot of offshore wind developments. Now, onshore wind developments are actually even cheaper than offshore wind developments, but we do suffer from NIMBYism. We don't want to see onshore wind, or at least a subset of people don't. And so onshore wind has really largely stalled in the UK, and we're using offshore wind instead, which is a little bit more expensive, but does mean that we won't necessarily suffer from spoiling our local area. Not only that, but the diverse locations of our wind and solar resources around the UK should help with delivering a stable grid, with the national grid infrastructure being able to move energy from one part of the UK to another. However, local energy storage systems, like this one in Leighton Buzzard, may help with minimising the need for wider infrastructure upgrades of that national backbone grid. So, in summary, the grid is transforming around us very quickly. It's just that we may not necessarily be aware of it. Peak electricity usage is currently 16% lower than it was in 2002, and therefore all of the EV charging that we need won't even trouble the grid at all. Even the extra demand that the heating transition is going to cause is being planned for. Don't panic, there are lots of intelligent people working diligently behind the scenes in order to make the energy transition viable and successful. It's all going to be okay. So come on in, the water's lovely. Get yourself an EV and enjoy the ride. Well, that's it for another video. Your comments and questions are most welcome in the section below. If you've liked the video, please consider hitting the thumbs up button. That tells YouTube that you've enjoyed the video, and it may help promote it to other people who will also enjoy it. And subscribe if you want to see more. Thanks.